There were not very many injuries in week 10 of fantasy football, which is great. But that means in week 11, the waiver wire is going to be a little bit thin, but we still have a few teams on bye, so we got to find some good options for this week. That's right, welcome to week 11 fantasy football. On today's show, we're going to be talking about some of the injuries that we did see here from this past weekend, 5 things we learned from week 10 fantasy football, what teams are actually on an upcoming bye. Then we'll go through the waiver wire each position, quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end, and defenses. Plus, I'm going to cover 5 players that I'm okay dropping at this point of the fantasy football season. Now, before I get into the first section, though, I got to shout out today's sponsor, Turtle Beach. And I really need you to do me a favor. Don't procrastinate like I do when it comes to Christmas gifts. It's almost mid-November already. Christmas is right around the corner, and I'm sure you have a few people out there on your Christmas list that can benefit from something from Turtle Beach. Now, not that long ago, I gave my son a new set of the Stealth 700 headphones, and he absolutely loves them. They're wireless. He can connect his cell phone to them. He can use them as headphones to listen to music while he's doing homework. Whatever it is he wants to do, he's absolutely loving them. But Turtle Beach doesn't have just awesome headphones. They got keyboards, they got mice, they got racing simulators, flight simulators, whatever it is you need, they got you covered. They're great high quality products that aren't gonna break the bank, and then on top of that, I'm gonna give you a discount. All you gotta do is use the promo code headliners at checkout at turtlebeach.com to get yourself 10% off your order. That's right, you heard me correctly. Use the promo code headliners at checkout for 10% off your order at turtlebeach.com. But all right, let's dive into some of the injuries that we did see last weekend in week 10. But like I said in the opening, there weren't any major injuries, which are great. However, there are 5 guys that I feel a lot of people are going to ask questions about. We got Aaron Jones, Najee Harris, Tank Bigsby, Dalton Kincaid, and Sam Laporta. Now, for Aaron Jones, he suffered a chest injury, was actually carted off the field, went back, had x-rays, they came back negative, so dude said piss on it and went back into the ball game. Now, I don't know about you, but it seems like there have been multiple instances here in 2024 where Aaron Jones got injured. Looked like he was going to be done for quite some time, and dude just comes back into the game. What about Najee Harris? He suffered an ankle injury. He did return to the game though, so this does not seem like a major injury. Definitely something to pay attention to the practice reports here in week 11. How about Tank Bigsby? Now, he was limited in practice leading up to week 10 due to an ankle injury and then re-injured that ankle during the week 10 ball game. Now, he did return, but he hardly played after his return. Somebody else we need to pay close attention to here this week. If he were to miss some time, all of a sudden, Travis Etienne becomes more fantasy viable. Then we have Dalton Kincaid. He suffered a knee injury. Now, he left in the first half of that ball game, but came back in the third quarter, only played 2 snaps, and then he was shut down. Could he miss some time? And then Sam Laporta suffered a shoulder injury. Sounds like an AC joint injury, and he could miss maybe a week or so with that injury. What does that mean for the Detroit Lions offense? Does it even matter? Are they even going to miss him? All I know is we finally got some fantasy startable weeks from Sam Laporta over the last few weeks of the season, and now he may be gone for a couple of weeks. But now let's go ahead and move on to 5 things that we learned from week 10 last week. The first thing up is the Chiefs are probably going to end up three-peating in 2024. And listen, I hear the people out there all the time. They're saying how the refs have basically given 5 wins this year to the Chiefs. I've seen the missed calls. I've seen Juwan Taylor basically false start on every play for the last 2 years, just like you have. I've seen everything go their way. But here's the reason why I think they're going to three-peat. Despite everything going their way in the first 9 games of their season, now they're about to get healthier. Juju Smith-Schuster should be coming back soon. Isaiah Pacheco should be coming back soon. And honestly, we know the Chiefs play better second half of the season. Now, full disclosure, was I cheering for Denver yesterday? Yeah, maybe I was a little bit. But with the way things are going, Chiefs are probably going to three-peat. How about Caleb Williams not being the savior in Chicago? Let's put the stats aside. Let's put the records aside. Let's put the dumbass excuses aside that people want to leave for him all over social media. If you watch the film of Caleb Williams playing football, and the biggest part of this, if you're being honest with yourself, you're going to see that it's not just Jaden Daniels, but it's Drake May and Bo Nix. All of them are more NFL ready than Caleb Williams is right now. He has no passing touchdowns over the last 3 weeks. It looks like he has no respect on that team. He's down on the ground. Other teams are picking him up. It just does not look good. So when I see all the excuses of, oh yeah, well, it's his play calling and it's his offensive line, stop. It's not all that. Because honestly, I don't care if the Bears are winning or losing ball games. That's not what I'm looking at, especially from a fantasy standpoint. I'm looking at the actual play on tape, and it's not good right now for Caleb Williams. Williams. It's just not. Now, can he turn it around at some point? 100% sure. But at this point of his NFL career, those other three rookie quarterbacks are just better. Now, how about the next thing, though? The Arizona Cardinals are for real? Since starting the season 1-3, they've now won 5 of their last 6 ball games. Their defense is absolutely hot right now. They are actually up to the 13th overall defense in the NFL and the 13th overall offense. They are climbing quickly. And how do you win late in the NFL season? You run the ball and you stop the run. The Arizona Cardinals haven't allowed over 80 yards rushing to their opponents in 3 of their last 4 games. And in case you've been living under a rock, James Conner is out there absolutely crushing it, and the Cardinals are running with success each and every week. Now, does this mean they're a Super Bowl contender? No, probably not. Could they set themselves up for a wild card bid into the playoffs? Yeah, I think they really could. And when you take into account what their expectations were entering the season, even for myself included, they are definitely outproducing their expectations. We used to look at the schedule and games against Arizona were kind of ones we would want to circle for our fantasy studs to play against. That is not the case anymore. Which takes us to our next thing that we learned. Maybe next year, Dallas, do you realize they have the same amount of wins right now as the Carolina Panthers? And it's not just because of the Dak injury. Their defense has allowed at least 27 points to their opponents in 4 straight ball games. Their own stadium is blinding them with sunlight. Jerry Jones seems to be clueless. The play calling sucks. I mean, do I really need to go on? The season is over for Dallas. It's just crazy to me how Jerry Jones said that they were going all in this year and this is what we have to show for it. How about the Bills? They have basically clinched the division already. And this isn't really official, but it might as well be. They're playing great right now, despite having multiple injuries on offense. And through 10 weeks of the season, they already have a 5-game lead in the division. And I'm sorry, I don't see the Jets or the Pats making a run at the playoffs at this point. Miami, maybe. But they basically need to win out rest of season, and I don't see that happening either. Now, I don't want to jinx anything, but it seems like the Bills are already going back to the playoffs. But all right, now we're moving on into week 11. And we talk about bye weeks for this week, we got 4 teams: the Giants, the Cardinals, the Buccaneers, and the Panthers. So for the New York Giants, if you've been using Tyrone Tracy or Malik Neighbors, you're not going to this week. Arizona, no Kyler Murray, no James Conner, Marvin Harrison Jr., or Trey McBride. How about Tampa Bay? No Bake Show, Rashad White, Bucky Irving, Cade Otton. We're without 2 top-tier tight ends this week. That absolutely sucks. And then for Carolina, it's really just Chuba Hubbard will not be available here in week 11. But who will be available? Let's dive into the waiver wire now, starting off at the quarterback position. And we got a couple quarterbacks to discuss here in week 11. We got some options. How about Russell Wilson? He's only 40% owned as of right now with a matchup going up against Baltimore. 3 straight wins, an offense that scored at least 26 points in all 3 of his starts. He has 7 touchdowns through the last 3 games, and they added Mike Williams. Now, he didn't do a whole lot in week 10, but he did catch himself a deep ball touchdown. We already know that Russ loves to throw the deep ball, and with so much attention going the way of George Pickens, we could see Mike Williams really help the production of Russell Wilson down the stretch. Now that matchup going up against Baltimore is great because they allow the 2nd most fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. Then we got Justin Herbert, who's 49% owned going up against Cincinnati. And Harbaugh is starting to loosen the reins a little bit, and the fantasy points are starting to come in bunches for Justin Herbert. 6 touchdowns over his last 3 games, has had at least 30 yards rushing in 2 of his last 3 games played, and now a matchup going up against Cincinnati, who allows the 5th most fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. How about Bo Nix? How on God's green earth is Bo Nix only 51% owned right now? He's got a matchup going up against Atlanta, and he's the quarterback 9 overall on the season. He's only gone under 16 fantasy points 1 time in his last 6 games. Only has 2 interceptions over his last 8 games, and now gets a matchup going up against Atlanta that allows the 7th most fantasy points per game to the quarterback position. Why is he on the waiver? Pick up Bo Nix if you need a quarterback. How about Geno Smith? He's going up against San Francisco. He's coming off the bye, and a lot of teams may have dropped him if they needed another option. We know that DK Metcalf should be back. He's the current quarterback 10 overall as Geno Smith, averaging 18 fantasy points per game. He played against San Francisco just a few weeks ago back in week 6. In that game, he threw the ball 52 times. And with San Francisco being able to find the end zone like they do each and every week, Geno's probably going to have to throw the ball 40 plus times again. He really is an option for your fantasy team if needed. And then lastly, Will Levis of the Tennessee Titans. This one a little bit more risky. He's only 3% owned out there, so he should be out there for the bulk of leagues. He's going up against Minnesota. And in his first game back last week, he was able to find Calvin Ridley for 2 touchdowns. But really, this one right here is all about the matchup. It's way easier to throw on Minnesota than it is to run on them. And if Sam Darnold can flush whatever the hell that was, I expect them to bounce back against Tennessee, which means more than likely the Titans are going to be playing from behind, forcing Will Levis to throw the ball down the field. So there we have 5 options at the quarterback position. Now let's move on to running backs. And if we're being honest here, the running back position and the waiver wire, it's not a beautiful thing right now. At the top of the list, we got Audric Estime. He's 7% owned going up against Atlanta. Now coming into week 10, they told us his role was going to be increasing, and it did. He saw a season high in snaps and touches. Now he didn't really do a whole lot with it, but he really didn't do anything to lose more of his opportunity either. We know Denver's going to run the ball as the season goes on. It's just what happens in the cold months. So if you're looking for a running back bench stash, Audric Estime is an option. How about Alexander Mattison? He's 60% owned going up against Miami. He's coming off the bye week. Some people may have dropped him in your league. And on the year, Miami is allowing over 20 fantasy points per game to the running back position. Now, Alexander Mattison has had at least 17 touches in 4 of his last 5 games played. In my opinion, the biggest concern with Alexander Mattison is how often the Raiders fall behind. Now, he is still slightly involved in the passing game and the best option they have in the backfield, so he needs to be owned on your fantasy team if he's out there. How about Tajay Spears? He's 45% owned going up against Minnesota. He came back in week 10 and didn't really look half bad. He averaged 6.7 yards per carry on the ground, but this isn't really one of those options that you can just pick up and throw right into your starting lineup. It's a tough matchup going up against Minnesota. They allow the 4th fewest fantasy points per game to the running back position, but if you're definitely a Tony Pollard owner, Tajay Spears should be on your radar. How about Jaylen Warren of the Pittsburgh Steelers? He's 60% owned going up against Baltimore, and depending on any limitations that we could see this week from Najee Harris, we could be seeing a whole lot more of Jaylen Warren. He just had a season high in touches with 16. We know he's 3-down capable. He can catch the ball out of the backfield, but this is another one of those tough matchups. Going up against Baltimore, they allow the 8th fewest fantasy points per game to the running back position. The only way I start Jaylen Warren this week is if for some reason Najee Harris is ruled out. Then we go down to Gus Edwards. He's going up against Cincinnati. He just came off the IR and he was running hard in week 10. He only got 10 carries, but he averaged 5.5 yards per touch on the ground. Now we know he's not someone who's going to be overly utilized in the passing game, but on the ground, he could definitely get more touches here in the coming weeks. Not somebody that I want to pick up and start right away either. More of a stash pick really, and if you own J.K. Dobbins, Gus Edwards probably should be on your bench as well. And then lastly, Keaton Mitchell. We talked about him last week. He's 10% owned. He's going up against Pittsburgh. He barely played in his first game back, and honestly, he's probably barely going to play for the next few weeks. But if you're really looking for one of those late season lottery tickets, if you have the availability to stash Keaton Mitchell, he's definitely an option. So yeah, like you can see, the waiver wire, it's kind of oof when it comes to the running back position, but let's move on to wide receivers. And just like every other week this season, there's plenty of options at the wide receiver position on the waiver wire. A couple guys who are highly owned, but I really don't understand why. Just go out there and check to make sure that they weren't dropped in your league. The first one is Cedric Tillman. He shows 65% owned. He's coming off the bye week, so a lot of people may have dropped him last week if they had to. But now we know that Jameis Winston is going to be starting. We know that Tillman's had at least 9 targets in 3 straight games, 12 plus fantasy points in those 3 games as well. And now they have a great matchup going up against New Orleans, who allows the 9th most fantasy points per game to the wide receiver position. And then Juwan Jennings, only 64% owned. Listen, I know people out there will say, I don't know where these ownership percentages come from. They come from Sleeper and they come from ESPN. So if you don't like it, take it up with them. But these guys should be up in the 80s or 90s at least, especially Juwan Jennings. He's coming off an injury and their bye week, and he immediately got 11 targets in week 10. Now, when you look at this San Francisco offense, there's no reason to think that that volume isn't going to be there weekly for Juwan Jennings. Now, when you have guys like Christian McCaffrey and Deebo Samuel and George Kittle, yeah, the touchdowns may be a little sporadic. But when it comes to volume, I can see Juwan Jennings hovering above 8 targets a week. And just that alone in that offense makes him a must-own guy for me. How about Noah Brown of the Washington Commanders going up against Philadelphia this week? He's only 21% owned, and he's really become the number 2 option for Jaden Daniels. If you're a member on this channel, Mac drops his late week lottery tickets every single Friday or Saturday, and Noah Brown has been talked about here in the past. He's had at least 6+ targets now in 4 of his last 5 games. He's averaging over 11 yards per reception, and now he gets a matchup going up against Philadelphia, who is much easier to throw on than run on. He becomes a week 11 option. How about Quentin Johnston of the Los Angeles Chargers? He's 45% owned going up against Cincinnati, and he's really more of a depth piece. He isn't some weekly must-start guy, but with the Los Angeles Chargers starting to throw the ball a little bit more here as of late, Quentin Johnston has been one of the main beneficiaries. He's had back-to-back games with 10+ fantasy points, touchdowns in 4 of his last 6 games played. Now, his yardage is going to be a little bit lower. He's more touchdown dependent, and that's why he's not some weekly start. We're looking for good matchups when it comes to Quentin Johnston. Then we go down to Mike Williams. We talked about him briefly before when talking about Russell Wilson. He's 25% owned in a matchup going up against Baltimore, and he really is one of those could-be ads here for your fantasy football team. He just got to Pittsburgh, but he's already got a 32-yard touchdown. He's already doing more in Pittsburgh than he did with the Jets, and we know that Russ likes to throw the deep ball with so much attention on George Pickens. Mike Williams could possess some late-season value here in 2024, could really develop into another deep threat in that offense. Then we have MVS, Marquez Valdez-Scantling of the New Orleans Saints, only 1% owned, totally popped off in week 10 and now has a matchup going up against Cleveland. And a lot of people are going to look at the box score, at the stat line of MVS and be like, look what he did in week 10. This dude is going to be a league winner in fantasy football. I'm not ready to go that far, but we got to be honest with ourselves. Who else is there to really throw the ball to in New Orleans at this point? And when we look at the game of MVS, it's pretty similar to that of Rashid Shaheed, who found success in this offense to start the season. We know almost every single week, Derek Carr is going to give this guy an opportunity at a deep play. Is it going to happen each and every week? Probably not. But with the opportunity that he's going to see in New Orleans, he's not a bad ad right now for your fantasy football team if you're looking for a wide receiver. And then lastly, it's Ricky Pearsall of the San Francisco 49ers. He's 55% owned in that matchup going up against Seattle. He's had back-to-back games now with at least 70 yards, just had his first touchdown of the year this last week. But he's also played in over 60% of the snaps in 2 of the 3 games he's played since returning from being shot. He's really more of a matchup-based player, but a great option on a team that knows how to put points on the board. So what about the tight end position, right? We're a little banged up right now. Right? Dalton Kincaid is banged up. Sam Laporta is banged up. We got Trey McBride is on a bye week. We got Cade Otton who's on a bye week as well. We need some fill-in options, and there's not a whole lot out there on the waiver wire. Obviously, Taysom Hill needs to be added if you need a tight end. He's only 35% owned right now in the matchup going up against Cleveland. We talked about him a lot during our live show last Saturday night. I mean, he's a boom or bust player. It's going to remain that way each and every week, but like we just mentioned with MVS, this is an offense that doesn't have a whole lot of weapons. And if it weren't for one holding penalty, this would be an absolute no-brainer for everyone in fantasy football. He had an 88-yard touchdown that was called back due to holding on Foster Moreau. Had that not happened, everyone that plays fantasy football is rushing to the waiver wire to get Taysom Hill. It got called back to penalty, and for the people who don't watch those games, they have no idea about it. They look at the box score, he didn't really impress. I'm not overly, interested in Taysom Hill. He's getting carries and he's getting targets weekly, and if you need a tight end, he needs to be rostered. How about Will Dissly of the Los Angeles Chargers, only 4% owned going up against Cincinnati, and he's really more of a full PPR option, a little bit more of a safety blanket in this offense because he doesn't get very many deep shots down the field or touchdown opportunities, but in full PPR leagues, he's had at least 8 fantasy points now in 3 of his last 4 games played. And then what about Dawson Knox in Buffalo? Only 4% owned, a matchup going up against Kansas City, and with the injury to Dalton Kincaid, and we already know that Keon Coleman and Amari Cooper are not 100% healthy, we could see a lot more Dawson Knox. Now, Dalton Kincaid was not out there absolutely killing it and racking up targets. So it's not like Dawson Knox is some tight end savior. However, if you're looking for an option, he should be out there in week 11. But all right, now for those of you who stream some defenses, let's take a look at some options here for week 11. The Texans defense, they're currently 44% owned in a matchup going up against Dallas. Between what we saw in the form of takeaways from the Houston defense in week 10 and how the Dallas offense has looked for most of the season, this one should be an absolute no-brainer. Dallas has only scored 10 more points on the year than the Carolina Panthers. How about the Lions defense? They're 63% owned. They're going up against Jacksonville. This one right here really has everything to do with the possibility of going up against Mac Jones and the amount of injuries that Jacksonville has right now. The Lions defense could be a great option. And then how about the Packers defense? They should be widely available in a lot of leagues, only 25% owned going up against Chicago. They're coming off their bye week. They're well rested. They had an extra week to prep for this matchup, and Caleb Williams doesn't have a touchdown now in 3 straight weeks. So if you're looking for a defense, those are 3 options. All right, now on to 5 players that I'm okay dropping right now in fantasy football. The first one is Deontay Johnson of the Baltimore Ravens. He's 81% owned as of right now, and his snap percentage actually went down in his second game with Baltimore. We already know this is a low-volume passing offense, and they're still throwing the ball to the likes of Zay Flowers, Rashad Bateman, Mark Andrews. There's not a lot of volume to go around anyway in this offense, and that's what Deontay Johnson needs. He can't even make it on the field half the time. If there's a better option out there on the waiver wire, I can't blame you for dropping him. How about Jalen Tolbert of the Dallas Cowboys? He's 35% owned, and it's going to be hard for this crap offense to get the ball to CeeDee Lamb and Jake Ferguson. There's little to no chance that they figure out how to get the ball to Jalen Tolbert. Then Caleb Williams. He's 64% owned as of right now, and with the way that this Bears offense has looked, and with really no clear fix to it in the near future, I have a hard time telling anyone to keep anyone on the Chicago offense, maybe outside of DeAndre Swift. Now, if you have Keenan Allen, he's probably the first to choose on the chopping block, I guess you could say, when we're looking at the wide receivers. He is more volume dependent than the other 2 options in this offense, Rome Odunze and DJ Moore. They have more big play ability. Now, the big plays haven't been there, but if I'm looking to chop one first to the waiver wire, it's Keenan Allen. And then lastly, Michael Pittman of the Indianapolis Colts. He's 84% owned, and we all know he isn't healthy. Don't you remember the talk just a couple weeks ago about how there's a chance he could go on season-ending IR, but he's playing through the pain? Now we know we have Joe Flacco, which is great, but he prefers to throw the ball to Josh Downs, and now we're starting to see more Alec Pierce and Adonai Mitchell. Michael Pittman is just a disappointment in 2024. And with the back injury, if you have an opportunity to get somebody who's actually producing right now, I'm not against it. So there's your look into the Week 11 waiver wire here for fantasy football. I must say, it's one of the thinnest waiver wires that I have seen in quite some time. Now, if you enjoyed today's show, do me a favor, hit the like button if you haven't already, and then consider subscribing. I don't care that it's Week 11, maybe you just found us and you're looking for a fantasy home. It's right here with Headliner Nation. Now, I'm going to go ahead and get out for the day. Hopefully you enjoy the rest of your day, and then most importantly, do your part to make the world a better place. I'm a headliner.